My daughter-in-law slept with my husband a week before we signed the divorce papers. I didn't scream. I didn't confront her. I didn't even let my hands tremble. I pretended to know nothing. At the meeting, the lawyer handed me a document denying my rights. I smiled. What I did next left everyone in shock. I'm glad to have you here. Stay with me until the end and let me know where you're watching from. The afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains, soft and warm, brushing across the dining table I had set so many times over the past 4 decades. It should have been a comforting scene, the kind of peaceful afternoon women my age often joke about finally earning after years of chaos. But the silence wasn't comforting. It was hollow, too clean, too light, the kind of silence that follows only after something catastrophic has happened. 3 days earlier, Sage, my daughter-in-law's older sister, had shown up at my door looking like she had run through a storm, her mascara smudged, her hands shaking as she held her purse to her chest. She wasn't the fragile type. She wasn't emotional. So when she whispered, "Nain, I need to tell you something," I felt a piece of myself brace for impact. She told me everything. The lunch dates, the whispered conversations, the lies my husband had fed me for months. And finally, the truth I hadn't my mind form even in my darkest hours, that Ember, my son's wife, had been seeing him behind my back. I listened without interrupting. Years of being a wife, a mother, a peacekeeper had taught me to stay still when the world shook. So I held my teacup, let the steam touch my face, and nodded as each detail landed like tiny weights on a rope already fraying. Sage watched me closely. "You're not angry?" Angry wasn't the word. Anger is loud, sharp, explosive. But this was cold. This was erosion. This was the quiet cracking of stone that had taken 42 years to harden. I didn't shout. I didn't collapse. I simply said, "Thank you for telling me," and walked her to the door. That night, as my husband lay beside me, pretending the soft glow of his phone was work-related, I stared at the ceiling and let the truth settle like sediment. He didn't look at me. Not the way he used to when we were young and reckless and certain life would stay kind. He barely spoke anymore unless it was logistical, bills, groceries, doctor's appointments. The intimacy had evaporated so slowly that I almost missed its final breath. But now I saw it clearly. The late nights, the new cologne, the sudden defensiveness whenever Ember's name was mentioned, the way he moved around me like a guest in his own house. The next morning, he kissed my cheek before leaving for work. A light, absent gesture, one I once cherished, one that now felt like dust brushing past my skin. I made his favourite breakfast anyway. Habit is a powerful thing. I scrambled the eggs the way he liked, light and fluffy, toasted the bread just until golden, even sliced the fruit and arranged it neatly on the plate. I caught myself smoothing the napkin beside the fork. 42 years of muscle memory. Then I sat down alone and watched the steam rise from the eggs until it disappeared. Later that afternoon, I drove to the attorney's office. The divorce papers were ready. He didn't know Sage had spoken to me. He thought he had managed to hide everything. He thought I still believed his sudden desire to separate for clarity was noble, necessary, mature. He arrived 5 minutes late, flustered, smelling faintly of Ember's perfume. A floral scent I recognized instantly because she wore it every Sunday when she came over pretending to help me cook. He didn't meet my eyes as he sat down. The lawyer slid a document toward me, a supplemental agreement meant to strip me of the rights my husband had promised to honor. I could see my husband's signature already printed on the bottom line. He hadn't even waited for me to review it. He signed ahead of time, as if my compliance were guaranteed. He didn't notice my hands were steady. He didn't see the look in my eyes. He didn't hear the click inside me, the final one that signaled my patience had expired. I read the paper slowly, carefully. Every line another thread in a web they had spun together. Then I smiled. My husband's shoulders relaxed, mistaking that smile for surrender. Ember had taught him to underestimate me. She called me predictable, soft, too old-fashioned to fight back. When I placed the pen on the table, I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. His eyes darted away. Guilt is a coward that hides in the smallest movements. "I'll sign," I said softly. His relief was almost pathetic, but I wasn't finished, not even close. I folded my hands calmly and leaned back. Because before I signed anything, before they took what they thought was theirs, I had a different plan, one neither of them would see coming. One that would make even Ember, with all her confidence and cruelty, rethink the meaning of the word victory. And as I sat in that lawyer's office, ready to play the part they expected of me, only one thought filled my mind. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The house felt different after that meeting, quieter, but not in a peaceful way. It was the sort of quiet that settles over a place when the truth has been spoken aloud, even if only one person heard it. I drove home with both hands steady on the wheel, the window cracked just enough for the cool air to graze my cheek. The sky was clear, unusually bright for late afternoon, but nothing about the day felt warm. When I stepped into the kitchen, the faint smell of pot roast still lingered from the night before. I hung my purse on the same hook I'd used for decades, then stood there for a moment, letting the stillness settle. My husband wouldn't be home for hours. Ember wouldn't show up pretending to help me fold laundry or drop something off for Wade. I had time to think, time to plan, time to breathe. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. The soft rumble of heating water gave the illusion of normalcy. I reached for the blue teacup I reserved for days when I needed clarity. Robert had given it to me the year we married. A small thing, a simple thing. But right now, it grounded me. I poured the hot water over the chamomile leaves and watched them swirl before settling at the bottom. It struck me how familiar that motion was, things being stirred up before sinking again. Sage's visit replayed in my mind, her voice trembling, her eyes refusing to look away from mine. She hadn't come to hurt me. She came because her conscience wouldn't let her stay silent any longer. When she said Ember's name, she said it with apology, not anger. I remembered that. I held on to it. I took my cup to the dining room and sat at the table, the same one where I'd celebrated birthdays, anniversaries, and quiet Sunday breakfasts. The sunlight stretched across the wood in pale streaks. Dust floated through the beam, rising and falling gently, like memories trying to settle. 42 years of marriage. 35 years of raising a son. 3 years of pretending Ember's smile was genuine. I traced the rim of my cup with my finger. I had always been the woman who kept the peace, the one who made sure everyone else was comfortable. I'd been told it was a strength. I had believed it, but peace had turned me into someone who tolerated too much, forgave too easily, and looked away too long. That wouldn't happen again. I heard the front door open. The hinges always groaned, no matter how many times my husband swore he'd fix them. His footsteps paused in the hallway. He didn't call out to me. "Long day?" I asked, my voice steady. He nodded without meeting my eyes. He set his keys on the counter and loosened his tie with the kind of exhaustion men use as a shield. The silence stretched between us. It wasn't companionship, it wasn't comfort. It was distance, a calculated one. "I stopped by the attorney's office today," I said. His hands froze mid-motion. "Oh? I saw the agreement." A flicker, barely there, passed over his face, a crack in the mask he'd been wearing for months. "It's just formality. Nothing personal." Nothing personal. Men say that when they want to wound you without admitting they meant to. I didn't answer. I simply sipped my tea. He moved around the kitchen, opening cabinets, closing drawers, performing a strange dance of avoidance. I watched him like an observer, not a wife. I watched the way he couldn't look at me, the way guilt bent his shoulders, the way betrayal made his jaw tense. I wondered if Ember liked that jawline. I wondered if she traced it the way I once did. He finally cleared his throat. "Dinner?" "I ate already." I hadn't, but the lie slid out easily. I needed space from him, space even food couldn't bridge. He nodded, pretending not to notice the tension. "I'll heat something up." I stood. "I'm going for a walk." His surprise was almost comical. I never walked after sunset, he knew that. 42 years of habits, and suddenly I was breaking one. "You sure?" "I'm sure." I took my coat and stepped outside. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine from the neighbour's lawn. The sky was shifting toward twilight, streaked in lavender and rose. I walked down the familiar sidewalk, past the mailbox, past the driveway, past the life I had built and tended like a garden that now refused to bloom. The neighbourhood felt different. Maybe it was me. Maybe betrayal changed the way streetlights glow or how trees look when the wind moves through them. Maybe pain sharpens everything until even the air feels edged. I walked until the sun sank, until the coolness bit at my cheeks, until my breath formed little clouds in front of me. And as I walked, I let every memory settle into place. Every late night, every whispered lie, every moment Ember inserted herself between me and the son I had raised. By the time I returned home, my decision was fully formed. It didn't rise in anger or desperation. It came quietly, like the closing of a door. A decision rooted not in revenge, but in truth. They thought they were writing the ending of my story. They were wrong. I stepped inside, hung my coat, and met my husband's eyes for the first time that night. "You'll get what you want," I said, his expression eased, "but not the way you think." He didn't understand. Not yet, but he would. Sunday arrived with the kind of gentle breeze that usually signaled a peaceful day. But peace wasn't what walked through my front door. Ember entered as if she owned the place, her heels clicking against the hardwood, her perfume filling the hallway before she even reached the kitchen. She carried a shopping bag, something glossy and expensive, the kind she used whenever she wanted to show off. "Nan," she chirped, her smile stretched too wide. "You look lovely today." A performance, all of it. I stepped aside so she could glide in. She kissed the air beside my cheek, leaving nothing but coldness behind. My husband appeared on the stairs, adjusting his shirt, his eyes flicking between us like he was watching for cracks. Ember slipped her arm around his, resting her head briefly against his shoulder in a gesture that once would have seemed affectionate. Now it felt like strategy. "We thought we'd drop by for our usual Sunday dinner," she said lightly, brushing invisible dust from the counter as if preparing the stage. "Wade will be here soon," I nodded. "I'll start the roast." She blinked, almost disappointed I didn't react. They expected tension. They expected the wounded wife. Instead, I reached for the cutting board and began slicing carrots with deliberate calm. The soft thud of the knife against the wood was the only sound in the room for a moment. Ember leaned against the island, tapping her manicured nail against her phone. "You know," she said casually, "once everything with the papers is settled, we should talk about the house. It's far too big for you alone. Maybe it's time to think about something smaller, cozier." My husband froze at the sink. I didn't look up. "That conversation can wait," she bit back a smirk. "Of course, I just want what's best for everyone." For everyone, meaning herself. She moved to the living room, arranging pillows that didn't need arranging, scanning the fireplace mantel as if checking what she would soon inherit. I watched her reflection in the oven door, her movements sharp, confident, careless. She had no idea the ground beneath her was shifting. Wade arrived minutes later, greeting his father with a loud clap on the back and embracing Ember with a kiss that lingered just a touch too long. They all sat around the dining table while I set out the plates. Ember took her usual seat beside Wade, her hand on his arm, her laughter just a shade too sweet. The conversation drifted from vacation plans to business talk, then, predictably, to finances. Ember's favourite topic. "You know," she said, swirling her wine, "once the paperwork goes through, everything will feel more balanced." My husband glanced at me. I took a slow breath. "Is that what you're hoping for, Ember? Balance?" She didn't catch the tone. "Of course. I mean, we all have to adjust. Change can be good." Her smile was polished metal, smooth, reflective, cold. Dinner passed with forced laughter and practiced affection. When they finally stood to leave, Ember stepped close to me, her hand grazing my arm in a gesture she wanted to seem tender. "You're being so strong through all this," she murmured. "Honestly, I admire it." I held her gaze. "Strength isn't always loud." Something flickered in her expression, a small, uncertain crack. As the door closed behind them, the house fell silent again, quiet, but no longer empty. I gathered the plates one by one, stacking them neatly by the sink. Their voices still hung in the air, like the echo of a storm that hadn't yet broken. They believed they were winning. They believed I was fading, but I wasn't disappearing. I was preparing. That night, long after the dishes were washed and the echo of Ember's laughter had faded from the walls, I sat alone in the living room with the lamp turned low. The house felt heavier than usual, as if the memories pressed against the ceiling, waiting to fall. I leaned back in the old armchair my husband once loved, and for the first time in weeks, I let my mind drift backward, past the meetings, past the lies, past the carefully staged Sunday dinners. I went back to the early years, back when Damon still reached for my hand without thinking, back when our son was small enough to fall asleep on his chest in the recliner, back when Ember was just a name we didn't know yet. I remembered the way Damon used to hum when he fixed things around the house, quietly, almost absent-mindedly. I remembered the warm smell of coffee on Saturday mornings, the way he'd set a mug beside me before rushing off to work. I remembered the way he'd actually blush, when he brought home flowers from the supermarket, as if embarrassed by the gesture. Those memories used to warm me. Now they ached like old bruises touched too soon. Somewhere along the years, something shifted, not suddenly dramatic. It was softer, quieter, a slow peeling away. He worked later, laughed less, spoke to me like someone speaks to a neighbour they're fond of, not a wife. He stopped humming. Then Ember arrived, pretty, polished, charming in the way people are when they practice in the mirror before visiting your home. She hugged me with arms that never fully touched me. She smiled as if she was memorizing the layout of every room. She asked questions that felt harmless then, how the finances were arranged, who managed the investments, whether I had ever considered downsizing. I thought she was simply curious. I didn't see the threads weaving together. I thought Damon was lonely. I didn't see how her attention wrapped around him like a warm coat he didn't want to take off. Looking back, I could trace every step. The late nights that ran over, the phone turned face down on the table, the sudden need for privacy in the study, the new cologne he insisted he bought himself, the Saturdays he needed fresh air and returned smelling like Ember's perfume. It all added up. I just didn't want to do the math. There were moments, fleeting, thin as hair, when I caught something off in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or fear, or simply the weight of the double life he'd built with his own hands. But every time I reached for the truth, he closed the door softly, gently, and I convinced myself not to push. I wanted to believe the man I married was still there, that he was just tired, that we were just older, that love didn't need to look the same to still be real. But Sage's voice had shattered that illusion with a single sentence. They were holding hands, like lovers. The kettle had whistled behind her as she spoke, but neither of us moved. I remembered the way the steam fogged the window that afternoon, how the outside world blurred into a haze, just like the life I thought I had. Sage had cried then, covering her mouth with trembling fingers. "I'm sorry, Nain. I should have told you sooner." But sooner or later didn't matter. The truth always arrives right on time. I looked around the living room now, the photographs on the shelf, our wedding portrait on the wall, the quilt I stitched by hand when Wade was little. Everything in this house whispered a story I had believed wholeheartedly, a story of partnership, a story of loyalty. Yet behind each memory, Ember's shadow lurked, stretching farther back than I had ever noticed. She hadn't just taken my husband, she had studied him, studied me. Studied the faults in our marriage like a map she intended to follow, and Damon, weak, aging, aching for something he couldn't name, let her. I placed my hand on the armrest, feeling the worn fabric beneath my fingers. So many years lived in this chair, so many quiet evenings, so much trust. The ache in my chest wasn't from betrayal alone, it was from clarity, sharp, sober, unforgiving. For the first time I saw the past not as a comfort, but as evidence. They thought I was still living in it, but I wasn't. I stood up, switched off the lamp, and let the room fall into darkness. I wasn't looking back anymore. Not with longing, not with regret, only purpose. The next morning I woke before the sun. The house was still draped in shadows, the kind that make familiar rooms look like strangers. I wrapped a shawl around my shoulders and walked to the kitchen, letting the cold tile ground me. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't need them. I knew this house by heart. Every corner, every floor, every creak in the floorboards. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the table as the sky outside shifted from charcoal to pale blue. It felt like the world was holding its breath with me. I opened the small notebook I kept tucked inside the drawer beneath the placemats. For years it had been filled with grocery lists, recipes, reminders for doctor's appointments. Now the pages held something different. Names, dates, details. Little things Ember thought I wouldn't notice. Little things Damon hoped I wouldn't question. I began with the bank statements from last year. Damon had once insisted we go through them together. Every line, every deposit, every withdrawal. It was our Sunday routine. But somewhere along the way, right after Ember started visiting to help with meals, he told me not to worry about the finances. "I've got it handled," he'd said, a sentence that now felt like an open door I hadn't stepped through. The first irregularity was small, a transfer made late at night, then another, then one marked as a correction, then one to a name I didn't recognize, Ember's maiden name. I traced the ink with my fingertip. The kettle clicked behind me, heating the water I'd forgotten I set on the stove. I poured it into my second cup, watching the steam rise slowly, like breath finding its way out. I flipped the page. Another note. Damon changed the will meeting. Again. 2 months ago, he cancelled his appointment with our long-time attorney. A week later, he met privately with someone new. He didn't know I found the business card in his coat pocket. I turned to the next page. A list of items moved around the house without explanation. Files missing from the drawer. Tax documents my accountant said had already been submitted, even though I never mailed anything in. A key I found in Ember's purse when she asked me to fetch her phone one afternoon. A key to our safe. Then the credit card charges, jewellery I never received, a hotel in another city. A restaurant we had never visited together. For weeks, these things floated around me like pieces of a puzzle I refused to solve. Now they clicked into place with brutal clarity. I closed the notebook and rested my hands on top of it. Not shaking, not cold, just steady. Steady in a way I hadn't felt in years. It was time to speak to someone who understood the language of betrayal better than I did. By 9 o'clock, I was parked outside my old friend Iris's office. She had been a paralegal for 30 years before retiring to care for her husband. She opened the door with that same warm smile she'd had since we were 19. But her smile faded when she saw my face. "Come in," she said softly. We sat at her kitchen table, the scent of cinnamon rolls drifting between us, and I placed the notebook in front of her. She turned each page slowly, her brows knitting tighter with every line. "Nein," she said finally. "They're not just trying to push you out, they're preparing to bury you, legally, financially, and maybe more." The words didn't sting, they fit. Iris reached for my hand. "You need help, real help." "I know. I'll put you in touch with someone," she said. "A friend of mine. He's discreet, and he doesn't like bullies." I nodded. I didn't need dramatic reassurances or elaborate plans. I just needed someone who knew the law better than Damon and Ember did. Before I left, Iris squeezed my hands and looked me in the eye. "You're not alone in this." But the truth was, I had learned to stand alone a long time ago. Back in my car, I rested my notebook on the passenger seat. The sun had finally risen, painting the windshield in bright light. I watched the colours shift, watched the world warm itself slowly. They thought they were the only ones making moves. They were wrong. I turned the key in the ignition and began the drive home. Not shaken, not afraid, but certain. The kind of certainty that comes when you finally stop surviving and start preparing. The man Iris sent me to see worked out of a modest office above a hardware store. Nothing polished, nothing meant to impress. His name was Lewis Harper, a retired investigator who'd spent his career untangling financial schemes and family disputes that looked harmless from the outside but rotted everything on the inside. When he opened the door, his expression was sharp, alert, the kind that told me he noticed everything before anyone said a word. "You're Iris's friend," he said, offering a quiet nod. "Come in." His office smelled faintly of old paper and cedar. Stacks of files lined the walls, organised in a way only he seemed to understand. I sat across from him, placing my notebook gently on the table between us. "I was told you could help," I said. He flipped through the pages without interrupting, stopping only to underline amounts, circle dates, or tap the margin with a pen. The room was so silent I could hear the second hand of the clock ticking behind me. When he finally looked up, his eyes had changed. "They've been planning this for a long time," I nodded. "You already suspected?" I did. My voice didn't waver. He pushed the notebook back toward me. "And you're not here because you want them punished. You're here because you want to stop them before they strip everything you've built." I appreciated that he understood without needing the story told in long sentences. "What do you need from me?" I asked. He folded his hands. Access, documents, anything they've touched. And, he paused, choosing his words, you need to keep pretending you don't know. That's the only way this works. I breathed in slowly. That part wouldn't be difficult. I had been pretending for months. Lewis slid a small silver flash drive across the desk. Record anything you can. Copies of statements, emails, even casual conversations. These people aren't sloppy, but arrogance leaves fingerprints. Ember's face flashed in my mind, her smile, her confidence, her certainty that she was winning. Arrogance, indeed. Before I left, Lewis added, one more thing. Don't confront them alone. Not now. Not ever. I didn't answer. I simply tucked the flash drive into my purse and stepped outside. The morning air hit my face, crisp and bright. For a moment, I stood at the top of the stairs, letting the sunlight settle on my skin. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel vengeful. I felt focused. When I returned home, Damon was in the living room pretending to read the newspaper. He glanced up when I entered, his expression shifting. Surprised, then wary, then neutral. You were out early, he said. I needed fresh air. He nodded, pretending that explained everything, pretending he didn't care. But his eyes followed me more closely than usual. The guilt was starting to tug at him in little ways, tighter shoulders, shorter breaths, restless fingers. Did you want breakfast? He asked. I'm fine. I walked past him, feeling his gaze on my back. They were sensing something, but they couldn't name it yet. Later that afternoon, Ember called. Her voice was syrupy sweet. Hi, Nain. Just checking in. How are you feeling today? Clear, I answered. She hesitated. Clear? Clear. I heard her shift on the other end, suddenly unsure if she was still holding the upper hand. Well, Wade and I were thinking of stopping by tomorrow. We have something we'd like to discuss. Of course they did. I'll be here. When I hung up, I stood by the window, watching the wind ripple through the maple tree in the yard. The branches swayed, steady and patient. Nature never rushed its storms. It let them build quietly. I opened my notebook again, turning to a new page. I wrote down the time Ember called, her tone, the invitation. Each detail mattered now. By evening, the house was washed in a soft orange glow, and Damon hovered again, pacing subtly, asking questions without real curiosity. Everything okay? He asked. Yes. You're quiet. I've been quiet for a long time. He didn't know what to say to that. After he went upstairs, I walked into the kitchen and opened the drawer where I kept the safe key he didn't know I'd moved. I touched it lightly, feeling the cold metal against my fingertips. They thought I was preparing to step aside. They thought I was resigned. They thought I was too gentle, too old, too tired to fight. But I wasn't surrendering. I was documenting. I was gathering. I was building the kind of truth that couldn't be twisted, erased, or buried. The kind of truth that would make Ember and Damon realize, far too late, that the woman they underestimated had finally stopped pretending. They arrived the next afternoon right time, too on time. People with clean intentions rarely watch the clock that closely. I heard their car doors shut in unison, then the practiced rhythm of their footsteps on the walkway. I stayed seated at the kitchen table, my notebook closed, a cup of tea cooling beside me. I didn't rehearse anything. I didn't straighten my posture. I didn't force a smile. I just waited. Ember walked in first without knocking, her confidence filling the doorway before she did. Wade hovered behind her, eyes darting to me with a strange mix of guilt and something colder, calculation. Damon stood by the staircase watching the three of us like someone waiting for a cue. Nen, Ember said brightly, we have big news. Her tone made my skin tighten, but my face stayed calm. Go on, I said. She linked her arm through Wade's like she always did when she wanted him to echo her words. We've been talking about the future, and we think it would be best for everyone if we reorganize the property and the accounts now before things get stressful. I let a beat of silence stretch. Stressful? She nodded, eyes shimmering with well-practiced sympathy. You know, with the divorce, with Damon needing clarity, with you preparing for the transition. Transition. They loved that word. It made betrayal sound like spring cleaning. Wade cleared his throat. We want to help. Mom, I glanced at him. Help with what? He looked at Ember, searching for approval before continuing. With the house, the estate, the assets. Ember found a financial planner who specializes in elderly transitions, Ember added smoothly. My husband tensed behind them. an involuntary flicker of discomfort. Even he knew that phrase was a bit too sharp. I folded my hands. You want to talk about the assets? We want what's best for you, Ember said, smiling as if the words were coated in honey instead of poison. I watched her closely. She believed she was in control, believed she was walking me step by step into a decision she and Damon had already prepared with forged signatures and hidden accounts. Where do you want me to live? I asked. She blinked, surprised by the sudden cooperation. Oh, well, someplace smaller, quieter, maybe a senior community? They have wonderful programs. I nodded slowly. And you two would stay here? Wade hesitated. Ember didn't. Well, yes, it would make financial sense. Financial sense. Not emotional, not familial, just profitable. I leaned back in the chair and looked at my son. Do you agree with all of this, Wade? His jaw tightened. He did that when he was hiding something. He'd done it as a child when he stole cookies. He was doing it now while helping his wife push me out of my own life. I think, he said carefully, it's time for all of us to move forward. Move forward, another rehearsed phrase. Ember placed a folder on the table. We brought some preliminary papers, just outlines, nothing binding. I didn't touch it. She nudged it closer. You can look through them later. We'll help you with the details. I lifted my eyes to her. What if I don't want your help? She froze for a fraction of a second. Small but enough. Control interrupted. Wade stepped in quickly. Mom, we're trying to make things easier. For whom? I asked, his mouth open then closed. Ember took over. This is the right choice, she said, voice softer than before. You're overwhelmed. You've been scattered lately. Scattered. That was the word they would use if anything happened to me. I reached for my tea, took a slow sip and set the cup down gently. I appreciate your concerns. Ember brightened, interpreting it as surrender. But, I continued, I'll be the one deciding what happens with my home, my accounts, my future. Her smile faltered. Wade looked confused. Damon shifted uncomfortably. I opened the drawer beside me and placed the safe key on the table. Not dramatically, just quietly enough to make them wonder what I knew. You three seem very invested in decisions that aren't yours, I said. Their eyes followed the key like it was a loaded weapon. Ember swallowed. We just care. I lifted the key with 2 fingers and slipped it back into the drawer. Good. Then you won't mind giving me space to think. They didn't argue. They couldn't. Something had shifted in the room, an energy they didn't understand. They left minutes later, Ember's smile brittle, Wade's shoulders tight, Damon's eyes avoiding mine completely. When the door finally shut, the house exhaled a long, tired breath. I walked to the window and watched them stand by their car, whispering urgently, glancing at the house as if trying to see through the walls. They felt it. A crack in their plan, a shift they didn't anticipate. A woman they thought was cornered, who now held her head high. I closed the curtains slowly. They believed they could tighten the trap. They had no idea I was already outside of it, watching, waiting, recording every step they made. The house stayed strangely still after they left, as if it were listening with me. I stood in the centre of the kitchen, letting the quiet settle on my shoulders. There was no triumph in me, no shaking, no fear, just awareness, a sharpened kind of calm, the kind that comes before a storm you're finally ready to walk into. I took my notebook, slipped it into my purse, and drove straight to Lewis's office. I didn't call ahead. I didn't need to. When I stepped inside, he looked up from a stack of files and nodded once, like he already knew I had something important. They pushed, he said simply. They did. Good. That means they're getting impatient. I took the seat across from him and placed Ember's folder on the desk. They brought this. He didn't touch it at first. Instead, he studied my face as if weighing whether I was ready for what came next. I held his gaze until he finally opened it. Inside were printed outlines, fake compassion written in bullet points, recommendations for elder support services, housing plans that read like eviction notices dressed in pastel colours. Lewis let out a dry exhale. They wrote this expecting you to fold. They always expect that. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a slim device, a small black recorder, no larger than a pen. From now on, you keep this with you. Every conversation, every hint, every slip. I nodded. He placed the recorder in my palm. It felt heavier than it looked. Now, he said, show me what you've documented so far. I opened my notebook. The pages were already filled with dates, transfers, signatures, and observations. He read silently, tapping specific lines with his pen. When he reached the section about the safe key, his brow rose slightly. "You moved it?" "Yes." "Smart." He flipped to the next page. "They don't know what you know. That gives you the advantage." I didn't answer. The advantage wasn't the point. Clarity was. Lewis leaned back, folding his arms. "This isn't just financial manipulation. This is coordinated, intentional. They're setting up a narrative around your stability, your mental state. They'll try to make it look like you're unfit. That's how these cases play out." I stared at the papers on his desk. My husband's signature beside dates that didn't make sense, transactions that travelled through Ember like veins of poison. "I let them think I'm confused," I said. "Good," he replied. "Confusion makes predators sloppy." He drafted a list of tasks for me, documents to gather, accounts to review quietly, calls to make from a number they didn't know. He spoke clearly. No drama, no theatrics. Just the steady confidence of a man who had watched families unravel for decades and knew exactly where to place the thread. When I left his office, the sun hung low, glowing orange across the parking lot. I paused beside my car, letting the warmth settle on my face. It reminded me of the evenings I used to wait for Damon to come home, back when coming home meant something. Those days were gone now, and I wasn't grieving them anymore. At home, I moved through the room slowly, touching surfaces I'd dusted 1,000 times, feeling the weight of history in every framed picture and folded blanket. I opened the safe just long enough to confirm everything was still in place. Documents, jewellery, the original will Damon once signed with pride. I locked it again. Then I began the quiet work. I photographed statements and stored them on the flash drive Lewis gave me. I recorded a voicemail Ember left 2 hours earlier, her voice carefully bright, too careful. I took a picture of the folder she'd pushed across the table. I wrote down every detail I remembered from the conversation. The house was silent except for the soft ticks of the clock, a steady rhythm, a reminder that time wasn't running out for me, it was running out for them. When I finally sat down, night had settled around the house. Damon was upstairs, moving slowly, his footsteps heavy with whatever version of guilt carried. He hadn't tried to speak to me since yesterday. He didn't know how. I didn't go to him. Not anymore. Instead, I opened my notebook to a fresh page and wrote one sentence at the top. They think they're close. They have no idea how far behind they really are. The storm finally broke 2 days later. Not outside, but inside the house. It happened quietly, the way all dangerous things begin. I was in the kitchen slicing apples for a pie I didn't intend to eat, letting the steady rhythm of the knife anchor me. Damon came downstairs with his phone pressed to his ear, whispering with the kind of urgency people think is invisible when they're standing in another room. It wasn't. "No, she hasn't said anything. She's acting normal." "Yes, Ember!" "I told you. She's fine." Ember, calling my husband in the middle of the day, checking on me like I was an object she planned to move. I wiped my hands on a towel, walked into the hallway, and he froze the moment he saw me. He lowered the phone slowly, as if pretending would undo the truth I'd already heard. "Everything okay?" I asked. He opened his mouth, closed it, then nodded. "Just a work thing." A lie, quick and flimsy. I didn't question it. I simply walked past him, leaving the scent of apples in the air between us. The more space I gave him, the more he revealed without realizing. That afternoon, Ember arrived without warning. She didn't knock this time either. She barged in with the energy of someone who believed she had already won. Her heels clicked across the hardwood, her smile polished and bright. "There you are," she said, as if she owned the house. "We need to talk." I set the pie dish gently on the counter. "We talked 2 days ago." "Yes, but things are moving quickly." Wade spoke with the planner and Damon agreed it's time to finalise arrangements. My husband stepped toward us, tension gripping his jaw. "It'll make things easier, Nain." "For whom?" I asked again. Neither answered. Ember placed a typed document on the table, freshly printed, edges crisp. "This outlines the recommended restructuring. Housing, medical, financial. It's just a starting point." I didn't touch it, didn't look at it. Didn't give it the dignity of acknowledgement. Instead, I lifted my eyes to her. "Why the rush?" Her smile wavered. "We just want stability." Stability. Their favourite mask. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. It's hard watching you handle everything alone. We worry. I let the silence sit long enough for her to squirm. You're lying, I said calmly. Her lips parted. Excuse me? You're lying, I repeated, my tone even. And you're not very good at it. Her face stiffened. Damon looked down at the floor. The truth, spoken plainly, rattled them more than any accusation ever could. I took a step toward the table, finally glancing at the packet. Not reading, just looking. Where's the section about my accounts? On page, she began. I didn't ask you. She swallowed, caught off guard. This wasn't the version of me they planned for. Damon rubbed the back of his neck, a nervous habit he hadn't used since our early marriage. Nain, we're trying to help. You're trying to hurry, I corrected. There's a difference. He said nothing. I pulled out a chair and sat down slowly. Tell me the real reason you're here. Ember straightened, lifting her chin. Fine. If you want honesty, your house is too large for someone your age, and managing your finances is becoming complicated. Complicated? I echoed softly. Her confidence returned as she leaned her palms on the table. We're stepping in before things get harder for you. There it was, the narrative, the groundwork for painting me as incapable. I opened my purse and set something on the table, Lewis's small recorder. I didn't turn it on. I didn't need to. The sight alone prickled their composure. Ember stepped back. Wade's eyes narrowed. Damon's breath caught. I let the silence bloom again. You want to help, I said, but everything you're doing benefits only you. No yelling, no tears, just truth, sharp and simple. Ember crossed her arms, forcing a laugh. You're imagining things. Then you won't mind slowing down, I said. Damon finally spoke, voice low. She means delaying the decisions. Ember shot him a look. We've talked about this. Yes, I said quietly, but you didn't talk to me. Their plan began cracking in real time, small fractures but visible. I'll review your papers when I choose, I added. Not before. Wade muttered something under his breath. Ember's jaw clicked. Damon looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. They left shortly after, leaving the packet neatly stacked on the table like a threat disguised as paperwork. When the door shut behind them, the house was silent again. I picked up the document, flipped to the first page, then walked it straight to the fireplace. I didn't burn it. Fire leaves smoke, and smoke raises questions. Instead, I slid it into a drawer far from the safe, far from anything important. Then I sat down with my notebook and wrote the only sentence that mattered. They're accelerating their plan. And so am I. That night, the house felt charged, like static humming just beneath the walls. Damon moved through the rooms with a restlessness he tried to hide, but after 42 years, there was nothing he could conceal from me. I watched him quietly from the hallway as he paced near the study door, opening drawers, closing them, rubbing his temples like a man trapped between fear and obligation. He didn't know I saw him slip one of our joint folders into his briefcase. He didn't know I heard the zipper. He didn't know I was standing in the dark, listening. When he finally went upstairs, I stayed where I was, letting the stillness settle. I knew what came next. People who plan to betray rarely stop midway. They speed up when they feel pressure. Ember pushing, Wade assisting, Damon following out of shame or weakness, maybe both. I sat at the dining table and reviewed my notes under the soft glow of the pendant light. Each entry felt heavier than the last. Dates, amounts, their words, their patterns. It was no longer just suspicion, it was structure. A blueprint of what they were building against me. I didn't flinch. I didn't hesitate. The next morning, before the sun even reached the top of the trees, I got in my car and drove to Lewis's office again. He opened the door with raised eyebrows. I thought we'd meet tomorrow, he said. We don't have time, I replied. I placed the folder Damon tried to steal on the desk. He took this last night. I switched it while he wasn't looking. Lewis scanned the files. He's gathering documentation. This is how they set the stage. They'll claim you're unable to manage your finances. They'll argue you're confused, forgetful. They'll fail, I said calmly. He smiled, not out of amusement, but respect. Good, then let's move forward. For the next hour, we built the foundation they never expected me to lay. A freeze on certain accounts, a notarized record of my current mental and financial clarity, a private statement outlining the coercion attempts, a scheduled meeting with his attorney friend, discreet, experienced, ruthless. Lewis tapped one page with his pen, This will protect you, but the real power comes when they think they still have control. Let them talk. Let them push. Let them reveal themselves. I nodded. They will. When I left the office, I felt no fear, only certainty, the kind I hadn't felt since long before Ember stepped into our lives wearing that first forced smile. At home, Damon was waiting for me in the hallway. Where were you? His voice tried to sound casual. It wasn't. Out, I answered. He studied me, something wary flickering in his eyes. We need to talk. Then talk, he swallowed. Ember wants to come over tonight. Wade too. They think we should finalize everything before... Before what? I asked. He hesitated. Before things get complicated. There it was again. The script, the pressure, the desperation. I stepped closer and he had no choice but to meet my eyes. You seem nervous, Damon. His breath hitched. I'm not. You are. He looked away. Guilt always bends the neck. I don't want things to get ugly, he murmured. They already are. He winced. Before he could speak again, Ember's text lit up his phone, her name flashing across the screen like a warning flare. He tried to hide it. That was pointless. Tell them to come, I said, his head snapped up. You want them here? Yes. My voice steady, almost gentle. The calm before a shift only I understood. They want a meeting, I added. Let's give them one. He didn't know what to do with my agreement. He nodded stiffly and went upstairs, his footsteps uneven. I walked into the living room, opened the curtains and let the afternoon sun spill across the rug. Light filled the room slowly, washing over the furniture, the photographs, the years of memories twisted into something unrecognizable. I went to the fireplace and placed a single folder on the mantel, the one Lewis prepared for me. Nothing in it was dramatic, nothing loud, just truth, simple and undeniable. I sat down in the armchair and waited. Not anxious, not plotting, not afraid, just waiting. Because tonight, for the first time, they would walk into a house where the ground no longer belonged to them. For the first time, they would see me, not the woman they dismissed, not the one they attempted to erase, but the one they misjudged. And when they stepped through that door, smiling those careful smiles, they would finally understand the meeting wasn't for me. It was for them. They showed up just after sunset, shadows stretching long across the porch as they approached. I watched from the armchair, the house dim except for one lamp beside me. I wanted them to step into a quiet that felt intentional. Controlled. Mine. Ember walked in first, her smile too bright for the hour. Wade followed with his hands shoved in his pockets, his eyes shifting between me and the floor. Damon closed the door behind them, swallowing hard. Nain, Ember said softly. We're glad you're feeling up to talking tonight. Up to talking, as if I'd been fragile, as if they were caretakers. Sit, I told them. They exchanged a look, confused, thrown off balance, but took their seats on the couch. Ember placed a new set of papers on the coffee table, sliding them forward like an offering. We refined everything, just some final adjustments. It won't take long. I didn't touch the documents. I didn't even look at them. I simply folded my hands in my lap and let the silence stretch. Wade cleared his throat. Mom, this is what's best. You don't have to worry about anything. I'm not worried, I said. Ember tried again. We just want clarity for everyone, I nodded. Good. So do I. Their confusion deepened. Damon stared at the mantel, his eyes locked on the folder he hadn't seen before. I leaned back, steady and composed. Tell me exactly what you want from me. Ember blinked. We told you. Support. Simplification. A transition plan. No, I interrupted softly. Tell me the part you haven't said yet. Her smile faltered. I don't understand. You do. The air shifted. Wade sat up straighter. Damon reached for the arm of his chair. You want access to my accounts, I said. You want control of the house. You want the authority to manage my decisions. You want my signature on something you intend to rewrite later. Wade's jaw clenched. That's not... Stop, I said. Just one syllable, quiet but final. He stopped. Ember's eyes narrowed. You're being dramatic. No, I said. I'm being clear. I opened the folder on the mantel and held up a single notarized page. Their eyes followed it like prey watching a trap snap shut. This, I said, is a legal statement documenting every attempt you've made to pressure, manipulate or isolate me regarding my estate. The colour drained from Ember's face. Wade leaned forward. What are you doing? I'm protecting myself. Damon finally spoke, voice cracking. You didn't have to do this. I did, I replied, because none of you stopped. The room grew very still, a cold, suspended kind of stillness. Ember forced a shaky laugh. "So what? You think some paper changes anything?" I held her gaze. "It already did. I set the folder down on the coffee table, right on top of their documents. Everything is now with an attorney. Every interaction from this week has been recorded, not every file you've touched has been documented." Wade stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. "Why didn't you just talk to us?" "I did," I said. "You just weren't listening." Damon rubbed his forehead with trembling fingers. "We were trying to help." "You were trying to erase me," I corrected. That landed like a stone dropped into a still pond, quiet, but deep enough that none of them attempted to deny it. Ember reached for the stack of papers she brought, hands shaking now. "This is a misunderstanding. We can fix it." "You won't be fixing anything," I replied. "The accounts are frozen, the house is legally protected, and any further interference will lead to charges." Wade exhaled sharply, anger flashing across his face. "Mom, you're blowing this way out of—" "No," I said again. "I'm done being quiet." I stood slowly, letting the weight of every year, every sacrifice, every ignored warning fill my voice. "You used my trust to build your plans. You used my silence to justify your cruelty. You used my love to excuse your greed. No shouting, no shaking, just truth delivered like a blade wrapped in velvet." Ember's voice cracked. "We didn't mean—" "Yes," I said, "you did." Damon looked at the floor, tears forming despite himself. "I made mistakes. You made choices." None of them spoke after that, not for a long while. Finally, I pointed toward the door. "It's time for you to leave." Ember stood slowly. Wade rose beside her. Damon stayed seated a moment longer, his shoulders sagging, his life's collapse hanging heavy around him. When they stepped outside into the cold night, the air smelled different, cleaner, freer. I closed the door gently. No slam, no theatrics, just finality. Inside the quiet house, I sat down again and looked at the folder on the table. The storm had cracked open, and its truth was finally out in the light. The house was silent long after their footsteps faded from the porch. I stood there for a moment with my hands still resting on the doorknob, feeling the cool brass under my palm, letting the stillness settle around me like a soft blanket. It wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of something finally released, like a room exhaling after holding its breath too long. I walked back to the living room and sat in the armchair, the one that had carried decades of memories, good ones, warm ones, painful ones. The lamp beside me cast a gentle glow across the rug, catching the edges of the folder Lewis helped me prepare. It looked almost small now, small compared to everything it represented. For the first time in a long while, I let myself breathe deeply, slowly, fully. I didn't cry. The tears had dried long before they ever reached my eyes. What I felt wasn't triumph. It wasn't revenge. It was something steadier, something quieter, a return to myself. Outside, a gust of wind rustled through the maple tree, scattering a few leaves across the yard. Life moving on, little by little. Upstairs, I heard Damon's door close softly. He didn't try to come to me. He didn't knock. He didn't ask for forgiveness. Maybe he finally understood why silence was all I had left for him. Some endings don't need a final conversation. They reveal themselves long before the last word is spoken. I rose from the chair and walked toward the hallway where old family photos lined the wall. Wade as a toddler, Damon holding him with pride, me smiling in a summer dress, sunlight on my shoulders. I paused in front of each frame, not with sadness but with acceptance. Those moments were real. The love had been real. What followed didn't erase what came before, but it did change what came next. I turned off the living room lamp and walked to the back porch. The night air was cool as it brushed against my skin. Stars dotted the sky, small and steady lights that had witnessed centuries of heartbreak and healing. I wrapped my shawl around my shoulders and sat on the wooden bench, listening to the distant hum of the lake. I thought of Iris, of Lewis, of the quiet strength I'd gathered piece by piece over the past weeks. Strength I didn't even know was still in me. When the wind softened, I whispered, not to the night but to myself, "You're still here, you're still standing." And that was enough. In the days that followed, the house transformed. Not physically, nothing dramatic changed, but the air felt different, lighter, warmer. Damon moved out quietly without another attempt to sway me. Ember and Wade stayed away, their plans dissolved under the weight of consequences they had thought would never reach them. Letters came from lawyers, apologies came from Damon, silence came from Ember. I responded to none of it. I spent my mornings walking by the lake, letting the sunlight paint my skin gold. I brewed coffee slowly, savouring the warmth in my hands. I opened windows just to feel fresh air drifting through the curtains. I spoke with Iris, who told me, "You look 10 years younger," and I actually believed her. One afternoon I found an old quilt tucked in a cedar chest, a quilt I'd stitched for Wade when he was young. Tiny pieces of fabric joined one square at a time, a patchwork of patience. I ran my hand over the worn threads and smiled. Healing was like that too, quiet, slow, built in small pieces. Weeks passed before I sat down to write the last entry in my notebook. Not evidence, not timelines, not warnings. Just a sentence that felt true enough to close the circle. They took me for weak, but choosing peace instead of revenge was the strongest thing I ever did. I closed the notebook and placed it gently in the drawer. Then I stepped outside again, onto the porch, listening to the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of a bird settling into its nest. The world around me felt calm, honest, steady. I looked out across the yard, breathed in the cool evening air, and let the story settle, not as a wound, not as a battle, but as a chapter I had survived, and with a quiet heart I whispered the only ending this story ever needed. I'm free now.